What if I told you that Hungary intentionally flooded 50,000 hectares of farmland, an area larger than Budapest, to restore wetlands that had been drained a century ago? It sounds economically insane, right? Well, Hungary actually did this, and the result after 11 years amazed the entire conservation world. This is that incredible story. Picture Hungary's Great Plain, the Alfold, a vast flatland covering nearly half the country. For thousands of years, this region was neither entirely land nor water, but something in between. A mosaic of seasonal wetlands, meandering rivers, and temporary marshes that flooded with spring rains and dried during summer. This dynamic landscape supported extraordinary biodiversity, millions of migratory birds, Europe's largest waterbird colonies, and fish populations feeding entire communities. But by 2010, this landscape had fundamentally transformed. The wetlands were gone, drained systematically throughout the 19th and 20th centuries to create agricultural land. What remained was struggling farmland plagued by extreme flooding in spring and devastating drought in summer. The engineering that created this farmland, canals, dams, and drainage systems, had destroyed the natural hydrological balance that made the region function. The numbers revealed the catastrophe. Between 1850 and 2010, Hungary lost 92% of its wetland area, from 600,000 hectares to just 48,000. The Great Plain experienced the most severe losses. Over 400,000 hectares of wetlands converted to agriculture. This massive drainage project, intended to boost food production, had achieved that goal initially. But by 2010, the unintended consequences were overwhelming the benefits. Agricultural productivity was declining catastrophically despite intensive farming. Soil quality had degraded severely. The organic-rich wetland soils, once drained, oxidized and compacted, losing fertility. Farmers applied ever-increasing fertilizers and irrigation just to maintain yields, driving costs higher while output stagnated. Between 2000 and 2010, average crop yields on the Great Plain fell 18%, despite 35% more fertilizer application. The math wasn't working. Water management became impossible. Without wetlands to absorb spring floods, the Tisza River, Hungary's second largest, flooded catastrophically. The 2001 floods caused $500 million in damage, displacing 20,000 people. The 2006 floods destroyed 30,000 hectares of crops and killed 12 people. Engineers built higher levees, but this just pushed water faster downstream, intensifying floods in lower areas. Summer droughts worsened simultaneously. Without wetlands storing water, the region dried completely, causing crop failures and water shortages. Groundwater tables dropped alarmingly. Between 1970 and 2010, water tables across the Great Plain fell by 2 to 4 meters. Wells that once produced water at 5 meters depth now required drilling to 15 meters. This affected not just agriculture, but also drinking water supplies for towns and villages. Communities faced water rationing during summers. The cost of pumping water from deeper aquifers drove many small farms into bankruptcy. Biodiversity collapsed. Bird species dependent on wetlands declined by 85% between 1950 and 2010. The Great Plain once hosted Europe's largest breeding colonies of herons, spoonbills, and ibises, millions of birds in vast wetland rookeries. By 2010, these colonies had virtually disappeared. Waterbird populations that numbered in millions fell to just tens of thousands. Fish populations in the Tisza River system declined by 70%. Many species disappeared entirely from regions where they'd thrived for millennia. The economic and ecological crises were converging. Farmers struggled with declining yields, increasing costs, and catastrophic flood losses. Environmental degradation accelerated. Politicians faced angry constituencies demanding solutions, but disagreeing on what those solutions should be. Traditional responses, more drainage, higher levees, intensive irrigation, were making problems worse, not better. Hungary needed fundamentally different thinking. Then, in 2012, a coalition of Hungarian ecologists, hydrologists, and forward-thinking agricultural economists proposed something radical: reverse the drainage. Instead of fighting water with ever more expensive engineering, they argued Hungary should restore wetlands, intentionally reflooding farmland to recreate the hydrological functions that made the region ecologically and economically viable for millennia. The proposal was breathtaking in scope. Restore 50,000 hectares of wetlands across the Great Plain over 15 years. Critics erupted immediately. "You want to destroy farmland?" agricultural lobbyists protested. "Hungary will lose food production capacity." Farmers whose land would be affected organized protests. "We've worked this land for generations. You can't just flood it." Economists calculated lost agricultural output and declared the plan economic suicide. "This will cost billions and produce nothing." Media headlines screamed about environmental extremism sacrificing farmers' livelihoods. But the project's architects had done their homework. They demonstrated that wetland restoration wouldn't just provide ecological benefits, it would generate significant economic returns. Restored wetlands would provide flood protection worth hundreds of millions annually, eliminating flood damage downstream. They would recharge aquifers, providing water security during droughts. They would support recreation and tourism, creating jobs in economically depressed rural areas. And they would sequester carbon, generating revenue from international carbon markets. Most controversially, they argued that wetlands would actually generate more economic value than the struggling farms they'd replace. The farmland targeted for restoration was marginal, prone to flooding, requiring intensive inputs, and producing below-average yields. Studies showed these farms barely broke even most years and lost money during flood events. Wetland ecosystem services, water filtration, flood control, carbon storage, recreation would provide more stable, sustainable income than agriculture on unsuitable land. In 2013, Hungary launched the Great Plain Wetland Restoration Program, a $180 million initiative funded by the Hungarian government, European Union Life Plus program, and international conservation organizations. The goal: restore 50,000 hectares of functioning wetland ecosystem across multiple sites on the Great Plain. Timeline: 15 years from 2013 to 2028, with interim targets every 3 years. International wetland experts called it Europe's most ambitious restoration project and watched anxiously to see if it would succeed or fail spectacularly. Implementation required exquisite planning. The first challenge: identifying which farmland to restore. Not all drained wetlands were suitable. Some areas had been agricultural for so long that restoration would be prohibitively expensive. The team used sophisticated hydrological modeling, combined with historical maps from the 1700s, 1800s, showing pre-drainage landscape. They identified areas where natural hydrology could be restored relatively easily by removing drainage infrastructure and allowing natural water flow patterns to resume. Land acquisition was equally complex. Hungary couldn't forcibly seize farmland. That would be politically impossible and legally questionable. Instead, they offered voluntary purchase programs at fair market rates plus relocation assistance. Additionally, they offered perpetual conservation easements where farmers retained ownership but agreed to convert land from farming to wetland management in exchange for annual payments. Surprisingly, many farmers accepted. Tired of struggling with marginal land, they appreciated stable income from conservation payments. The first restoration site, the Bodrogköz wetland in northeastern Hungary, covered 4,200 hectares. Work began in October 2014. Engineers removed 47 kilometers of drainage ditches, filling them with excavated material. They dismantled 12 water pumping stations that had kept the area dry. They breached old levees at strategic points, allowing the Bodrog River to flood the area naturally during spring high water. The transformation began immediately. When spring 2015 arrived, water flooded the restoration area for the first time in 80 years. Satellite images showed the landscape changing from brown farmland to blue-green wetland within weeks. Initial flooding was somewhat chaotic. Water didn't immediately settle into stable patterns, but spread unevenly across the landscape. Engineers made adjustments, installing low earthen berms to guide water flow, without preventing flooding entirely. By autumn 2015, the area had stabilized into a mosaic of permanent ponds, seasonal marshes, and wet meadows, precisely the habitat diversity targeted. Ecological response was swift and dramatic. Within months, wetland plants long absent from the region reappeared, presumably from seeds that had lain dormant in the soil for decades waiting for wet conditions. Reed beds established rapidly, covering hundreds of hectares within the first year. Willows and poplars, wetland trees, began growing from seeds carried by birds from distant wetlands. Within 18 months, the Bodrogköz site resembled a mature wetland ecosystem that had never been disturbed. Bird colonization was even more spectacular. Spring 2016, just 18 months after initial flooding, brought the first breeding waterbirds. Grey herons established a small colony of 47 nests. By spring 2017, the colony had grown to 350 nests, and spoonbills and egrets had joined. By 2019, the Bodrogköz wetland hosted over 4,000 breeding pairs of waterbirds, representing 23 species, one of the largest wetland bird colonies in Central Europe, created from nothing in just 5 years. Encouraged by this success, restoration accelerated. Between 2016 and 2020, 14 additional sites totaling 28,000 hectares were restored. Each project refined techniques based on lessons from previous sites. Engineers developed standardized approaches for levee breaching, drainage removal, and flow management. Costs fell from $5,000 per hectare for early sites to $3,200 per hectare by 2020, a 36% reduction making restoration increasingly cost-effective. The hydrological benefits exceeded projections. Restored wetlands absorbed spring floods like massive sponges. During the 2013 teaser floods, before significant restoration, water levels peaked at 9.8 meters at Szeged, causing major damage. During comparable rainfall in 2020, after 28,000 hectares had been restored, water levels peaked at just 8.1 meters, well below flood stage. Hydrologists calculated that restored wetlands had prevented approximately $200 million in flood damage during the 2020 event alone. Groundwater recovery was equally impressive. Monitoring wells showed that areas within 10 kilometers of restored wetlands experienced water table rises of 0.8, 1.5 meters within just 3 years of restoration. This benefited remaining farmland significantly. Farmers reported reduced irrigation needs and improved crop resilience during dry periods. Some farmers who initially opposed restoration began advocating for additional sites, recognizing that nearby wetlands improved their own land's productivity. Water quality improved dramatically. Wetlands filter agricultural runoff extremely effectively. Plants and microorganisms remove nitrogen, phosphorus, and pesticides from water before it reaches rivers. Monitoring revealed that water passing through restored wetlands showed 65% lower nitrogen levels, 78% lower phosphorus, and 82% fewer pesticide residues compared to water from agricultural drainage. This improved river water quality downstream, benefiting communities that rely on river water for drinking supplies. The economic benefits expanded beyond flood protection. Recreation and ecotourism flourished. The Bodrogköz wetland attracted 45,000 visitors annually by 2022. Birdwatchers, nature photographers, and families seeking natural recreation. Local communities developed visitor centers, guided tours, and accommodation, creating 180 new jobs in an economically struggling region. Annual tourism revenue exceeded $3 million, significantly more than the marginal farmland had generated when cultivated. Carbon sequestration generated unexpected revenue. Wetland soils accumulate organic matter continuously, locking carbon away for centuries. Under international carbon markets, Hungarian wetlands began selling carbon credits to companies offsetting emissions. By 2022, restored wetlands were sequestering approximately 150,000 tons of CO2 annually, generating $4.5 million in carbon credit sales. This revenue helps fund ongoing wetland management, creating a self-sustaining financial model. The political transformation was remarkable. Early resistance melted as benefits became undeniable. Farmers initially protesting restoration began requesting it for their own marginal lands. Local governments that opposed restoration became enthusiastic supporters after seeing economic benefits in other communities. By 2020, Hungarian politicians competed to announce new restoration projects. What began as controversial policy became popular achievement to claim credit for. Scientific discoveries emerged continuously. Researchers studying restored wetlands made unexpected findings about ecosystem recovery rates. Traditional ecological theory suggested that wetland ecosystems would require 50 to 100 years to fully recover after destruction. Hungarian sites achieved functional ecosystem recovery in just 5 to 10 years, far faster than anyone predicted. This accelerated recovery appears driven by seed banks, dormant seeds preserved in soil, and rapid colonization by mobile species like birds and aquatic invertebrates. Biodiversity results exceeded all projections. By 2023, restored wetlands supported 276 bird species, 42 more than inhabited the region before drainage in the 1850s. This unexpected increase resulted from restored wetlands creating habitat diversity that didn't exist historically. Mosaics of deep water, shallow marsh, and wet meadow supporting species requiring different conditions. The restoration hadn't just recovered past biodiversity, it had enhanced it beyond historical baselines. Fish populations recovered spectacularly. The Tisza River system historically supported 60 native fish species. By 2010, only 38 remained. Restored wetlands provided critical spawning and nursery habitat. By 2022, 54 species were documented, a 90% recovery toward historical diversity. Commercial and recreational fishing rebounded, generating $8 million annually in economic activity. Species considered locally extinct, like the Danube salmon, began appearing again. Immigrants from populations downstream that found newly suitable habitat in restored areas. Amphibian recovery was equally dramatic. 12 amphibian species inhabited the Great Plain historically. 8 had disappeared by 2010. All 8 have returned to restored wetlands. Populations of some species, like the European tree frog, now exceed historical abundance. Monitoring revealed restored wetlands supporting over 10 million individual amphibians, creating massive insect control benefits for surrounding agricultural areas. Farmers reported reduced crop pest problems within 5 kilometers of wetlands, attributing this to amphibian predation. The agricultural benefits surprised everyone, including restoration advocates. Initially, farmers expected only nearby groundwater improvements, but monitoring revealed that restored wetlands created microclimatic effects, increasing humidity and moderating temperature extremes up to 15 kilometers away. Farms in these zones experienced 12 times and 18% higher crop yields during drought years compared to farms farther from wetlands. The wetlands were actually improving agriculture, not competing with it. Climate resilience became increasingly important. Hungary, like much of Central Europe, faces increasing climate variability, more severe droughts alternating with more intense floods. Restored wetlands buffer both extremes, absorbing floods and releasing stored water during droughts. Modeling suggests that by 2050, when climate change impacts intensify, wetland ecosystem services will be worth over $800 million annually, far exceeding any conceivable agricultural value from the restored lands. Technology played an increasing role. Advanced remote sensing using satellite and drone imagery allowed continuous monitoring of wetland health across all restoration sites. Artificial intelligence algorithms analyzed thousands of images, detecting vegetation changes, water level fluctuations, and wildlife populations automatically. This allowed adaptive management, quickly identifying and addressing problems before they became serious. Monitoring costs fell by 60%, while data quality improved dramatically. Genetic studies revealed surprising findings. DNA analysis of plants and animals colonizing restored wetlands showed that many originated from surprisingly distant source populations. Some species traveled over 500 kilometers to colonize new habitat. This demonstrated that Central European ecosystems remain connected by dispersal corridors, allowing rapid recolonization when suitable habitat is restored. It also suggested that even small restoration patches contribute disproportionately to regional biodiversity by providing stepping stones for species movement. International attention exploded. Hungary's success inspired similar projects across Europe. Austria launched the Danube floodplain restoration in 2018, explicitly modeling Hungarian approaches. Poland initiated the biodiverse marsh expansion in 2019. Romania, Slovakia, and Croatia all developed major wetland restoration programs between 2019 and 2022. By 2023, over 200,000 hectares of wetlands were under restoration across Central and Eastern Europe, a movement directly inspired by Hungary's success. The European Union incorporated Hungarian lessons into continental policy. In 2020, the EU adopted the Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, including targets to restore 25,000 square kilometers of wetlands across the continent by 2030. Hungary's projects became reference models. EU officials regularly visit Hungarian sites, and restoration guidelines explicitly reference Hungarian methodologies. What began as a single country's experiment became continental conservation strategy. Economic analysis continued revealing surprising benefits. Looking forward, Hungary targets 75,000 hectares of restored wetlands by 2035, an additional 25,000 hectares beyond current commitments. Preliminary planning has identified 18 potential sites. Funding is increasingly coming from private sources, insurance companies recognizing that wetland flood protection reduces their payouts, and corporations purchasing carbon credits. The restoration has momentum that seems impossible to stop. Challenges remain. Maintaining 50,000 hectares of restored wetlands requires perpetual management, controlling invasive species, maintaining water control structures, managing vegetation succession. This costs approximately $15 million annually, substantial but covered by ecosystem service revenues. Climate change may alter optimal management strategies. Ongoing research investigates how to design wetlands resilient to future conditions. Yet the transformation is undeniable. Landscapes that were struggling farmland are now thriving wetlands supporting extraordinary biodiversity, while generating greater economic value than agriculture ever did. Hungary demonstrated that ecosystem restoration isn't economic sacrifice, it's economic opportunity. The country that once drained wetlands to create farms has discovered that restoring wetlands creates more prosperity than farming ever could. From space, the transformation is visible. Satellite images from 2012 show the Great Plain as monotonous agricultural brown. Images from 2023 reveal scattered patches of blue-green wetlands, vibrant ecosystem oases across the landscape. These patches are growing annually, gradually reconnecting into the wetland mosaic that characterized the region for thousands of years before human drainage. For Hungary, wetland restoration represents more than environmental achievement. It's a fundamental rethinking of how humans relate to landscape, from exploitation and control to partnership and restoration. Critics said flooding farmland was economic suicide. Hungary proved it was economic genius. What seemed like sacrifice became prosperity. What looked like loss became gain. This is the story of how Hungary gave wetlands back to the Great Plain and discovered that nature as economy outperforms human agriculture when land is unsuitable for intensive farming. The transformation exceeded every prediction and continues accelerating. 50,000 hectares restored and counting. What do you think about Hungary's wetland restoration revolution? Could similar approaches restore damaged ecosystems in your region? Share your thoughts in the comments below.